All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to honor everyone's time and thank you for coming to this breakout session today. The topic is leading the way, the role of leadership in reading initiatives. And I think this topic is very timely. Couple things to note. We have leaders from the state of Mississippi who helped lead major efforts there for over a decade in Kristen Wynn. We have the San Joaquin County Office of Ed Superintendent, Troy Brown, who's going to talk a lot about how they're working with their local districts, and the superintendent of Palo Alto, Don Austin. So we have a great representation today. And, I think obviously we know that reading initiatives, it takes a lot to really move the needle on student achievement. And one of the things I know Todd Collins found when he went across our state to look at where had improvements happened, yes, there were places that had some common curriculum, but one of the things he heard over and over again was the leadership and the capacity throughout the system to continue executing on the improvements. So we have three great leaders today to talk from their perspectives. So without further ado, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves. And as they introduce themselves, I've asked them just what's something you're really proud of in the efforts that you helped lead with your team. So we're going to start from the state level with Kristen, hearing about Mississippi. Then we're going to go to Troy and talk about what's happening in San Joaquin. And then we'll go to Don, talk about Palo Alto. So Kristen, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Kelly, and thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Kristen Wynn, and I serve as the head of AIM Institute for Research and Learning. But prior to my time moving to AIM, I served as the state literacy director for Mississippi from 2019 to 2024. And you posed a great question, Kelly, because leadership really matters in this work. Leaders have to create this sense of collective efficacy around this work and this sense of urgency. And for us in Mississippi, because of our student data and where we were, we had a real call to action. Many people know the story of the Mississippi, not the Mississippi Miracle, but it's a marathon because we're still running that marathon until all kids can read. And so what I'm really proud of is of this work and in this space is it took time. It's not an overnight quick fix. It takes like I said, a sense of urgency. But what we did was create the systems and structures and we never changed them. We just went deeper. As the research starts to evolve, we start to evolve. So one thing I'm really proud of is that we were able to pivot in spaces where we need to pivot, and good leaders know how to be flexible. So I'm really excited to be joining my two colleagues here, Don and Troy, on this panel, and you as well, Kelly.
Thank you, Kristen. Troy, what about you in the Central Valley, leading San Joaquin?
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Kristen. I'm honored and even a little overwhelmed to be here and with this group, and excited to be with Kristen and Dawn as well. Thank you to our hosts. So, my journey, well, our journey, I'll say that because it'll lead into County Office of Education. I started out as a high school English teacher and would often get students that couldn't read or write, and this was several years ago, obviously, and I did not know what to do about it. And I don't think our system knew what to do about it either at the time. And so I struggled with that for a long time. And then as I moved into district administration and site administration, still had the same struggles, but was putting out a lot of other fires and things like that. But would always look at the data and watch our data, and data just seemed to not change a lot. We have this status quo sometimes in education, and we celebrate 1 or 2% growth. And I celebrate growth all the time, but is that enough? Is there enough urgency with that? And so when I came out to the county office and had the opportunity to step in as the county superintendent, and let me give just a little context on county office before I go any deeper. There are 58 county offices, because I know we have some from outside of California as well. There are 58 county offices of education in California, so 58 county superintendents, and our role is to serve and support our districts. That's what it is. And districts have their autonomy. They have a superintendent. You're going to hear from a great one in a minute, Don. They have their own board, but our role is really to serve and support. And we take that very seriously. And we also walk the line of not overstepping, but how can we support in the work that they are doing within the districts. And here in San Joaquin County, we have 14 school districts and a little over 154,000 students that we then support within that. And so we had this sense of urgency here. We knew districts were doing some great things. We knew some districts needed more support in the area of literacy. And we thought, what can we do as a county office of education, excuse me, to not overstep, but to show how can we support, excuse me. And so we really brought a lot of data to our district superintendents and had a discussion about literacy and talked about what can we do to support you. And this was actually 2 years ago this month when this started. And at that time, we signed as a group, and this was the first really all together group. So the 14 district superintendents, myself, our teachers college president, and our community college president all signed a declaration of support for early literacy. And that's the first time as a county we all come together on one thing. Again, districts still have their autonomy to do how and what, but we were coming together. If it's okay, I'd like to read just the last paragraph of that declaration because it's really powerful. We pledge as educational leaders to work as collaborative partners to improve all students' ability to learn to read while addressing factors of equity and access that impact academic growth and social emotional development for all students. So we use that kind of as this cornerstone to where are we going to go? And so we have a community of practice that meets regularly with all the districts, Delta College, Teachers College, county office, and we're trying to move the work forward there while still providing the autonomy that districts deserve. And we've really kind of broken off into two. We've created a culture of literacy, we think, in the area. And you can break that down in two. And I'm not going to go into those now because of time, but if it comes up later, I could share really the learning to read side of culture of literacy and then the reading to learn. And we know both are very important. And so we've tried to address both of those from our role as a county office and how can we support? And I'll stop there. I want to make sure to give Dawn time.
Thank you, Troy. I'm going to come back to you with some questions that are coming up in the chat as well. And Dawn, I'd love to welcome you. You've been the superintendent in Palo Alto and made some really important gains over the last few years. So turn it over to you.
All right. Well, just thinking about this topic, this breakout room, it's about the leadership piece. And I'm going to start with I came up through the high school lanes, and high school people by nature are not early literacy or reading experts. Um, so first thing I'm going to say is you don't have to be, but you do have to be able to identify a problem. And when you see a problem, talk to people about how you might address it. Palo Alto is one of the highest achieving school districts in the state of California, which isn't a bragging point. It's a point to say that it also masks some issues that are below the surface or in targeted groups and populations, and that was absolutely happening here. So leading with the data, and in our board member at the time, Todd Collins, had brought me some data that you just can't unsee unless you just don't want to see it. And what became pretty clear to me right away is that the discussions around reading and early literacy had a lot of emotion and not a lot of data. So people believed what they believed and really had no interest in hearing an opposing position or looking at the states. Some of the states I saw as absolute leaders in this space, and Mississippi being right at the top of the list. Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, we're all doing great work. but they also had coordinated efforts across their state. And California is, to say the least, loosely coordinated. I'd say actually not coordinated. But breaking through in the data piece really mattered, and we'll get into some of our data, I think, in a little bit. Um, but the idea too, in our district, we weren't just falling short with certain populations in reading and literacy. It's just the one that we thought if we really focused attention and did something amazing, could we focus on one area? And we chose early literacy because the data was so strong and we could look at comparisons of where we fell in the state. And if we were successful there, could it show that we could be successful in other areas too? And we'll get into some of our successes here in a minute, but um, that really became a driver when we talk about, what are we looking for in this whole concept of the science of reading. Well, if there's really a science and there is, why would we discount that when we don't discount other things through science? So once I got into it a little bit, I figured out as a leader, you don't have to be an expert. You have to follow data, ask questions, then lean on the experts, and then be willing to push through some resistance, which we'll get to, I think, a little bit further down the road.
Thank you.
All right,
Welcome.
thanks.
Um, I think it'd be really helpful for the audience just to hear a little bit more from each of you, and we can start with any of you, but kind of your role in the execution of really rolling out, new literacy training practices, curriculum, talking about the data. So, Kristen, we'll kind of start with you of like, how did you all see the state role in doing this, and what are elements that you all wanted to make sure were in place?
Great question. So I'm gonna piggyback off what Don said. With us, the data painted a really gut-wrenching picture of what was happening in Mississippi. Our state data was saying one thing and national data was saying something else. And if we dug a little deeper, we realized that our state data was saying our kids were significantly below grade level when we started this work. One thing as far as in leadership, leading this work, a policy is amazing. We've had a policy since 2013. It was backed by um, our state funding, but a policy is only as good as its implementation. You have to have the implementation structure in place to do that. And so I think we tend sometimes in leadership to use structure and systems interchangeably, but you have to have the structure because the structure creates the behavior. And the lack of structure creates a behavior as well. So with us, we had to take our policy and kind of pull it apart and structure it in a way around an effort of prevention and intervention. And then put the systems in place to drive that particular structure. The one thing I'll have to say is, and Troy mentioned it and with their declaration, you have to have this vision. There has to be a vision that's laid out around literacy, and it has to hit every aspect. We can't just focus on K3 and think that it's going to get us there without tapping into what's happening before kids are even entering school. Like, are we addressing that? And so a part of us laying down this structure is that the vision was a vision that hit everything from our early learning collaboratives to our K3 policy to our pre-service teachers, what we were requiring them and setting those expectations for them feeding into our school and feeding out. And then what do we do for our adolescents? And then we're moving into that space. But once you create that structure and you have this idea of prevention over intervention, instead of just working on the intervention, we can't intervene our way out of this problem. Then you set up these strategies where you have the teacher training, the coaches, the early identification. You cannot forget the parent piece because a lot of times we want to do this piece outside of a community. And I was just on a webinar the other day with a community leader that says a lot of times we come into communities with plan, but we never ask the community
Mm,
their piece into this. And so we were intentional about making sure the parent communication around this was so tight and robust. We started that at the state level and
mm,
rolled it out. And then the individual reading plans, and then attacking the curriculum, making sure that you have um, curriculum that teachers have in their hand that is of high quality. So with us, it's also in leadership, I would have to say, you going back to my previous statement, you can't be fearful of the flexibility because as we learn more, we should be pivoting in these areas. What we did in 2013 is not something we're still doing in now in Mississippi. We had to pivot based on where we grew or where we're going, where our students started to head, what our data started to showing. We had to be, and we couldn't be fearful of that, saying, okay, you started us doing one thing and now you have us doing something else. We created that collective efficacy. So when those changes needed to happen, we were able to pivot based on what our data told us and what we needed. Now, we didn't change our strategy, but we just pivot and did those things that were needed to ensure the success of our students.
thank you so much. Um, Dawn, I'd love to come to you next, just to talk about kind of, how you saw your role as superintendent, how you brought your principals along, how, teachers were brought along, your community, your parents. So kind of all the various roles that led to
Sure.
significant changes.
So yeah, I think history's going to treat us well on this one, but short-term history was rough.
Mm,
I don't want people to think, oh, just lead with data and everyone's going to come along. That's just not the case. You're going up against things that have nothing to do with data or student achievement. People like what they like. And if you get to go to certain conferences and you're treated well and the presenters are great, then, sometimes that student data piece, it is what it is. And that's just a terrible starting point. When I look back on this, it was interesting. The counter arguments to making any shift in either methodology or curriculum was, well, it's not the curriculum. And it's not our teachers. Our teachers work hard. You can't blame the kids. It's not the kids. I was like, well, there's not a lot left. Yeah. One of these has to be something that we can leverage and do something with. But I'd say the challenge wasn't picking the actual curriculum as much as it was around building a belief that there's not only an identified problem, but a better way of attacking it. So as the leader, especially, actually in this particular case, I think it's a benefit to have a non-expert in literacy leading this because you can lean on common sense and say, look, if we care about every kid being successful and we're in the bottom 10% of the entire state of California in low income Hispanic student performance in third grade, how can those two things reconcile? So I just kept there. Like any counter, it's like, okay, I understand your counter feeling, but I don't understand the reasoning behind it or the clinging to something that is clearly not providing the results we need. Another piece, when you think about science of reading, I think it gets reduced sometimes to this idea that it's a simplified, all about phonics
mhm,
and it can't be fun and we're not going to honor multiculturalism or other things. It's ridiculous. I've had people say, "Well, yeah, you've been more successful now, but kids don't want to read." It's like, who who said that? Like, how did you get to that conclusion? So some of these expected or I guess proposed downfalls just never were proven to be true. All we do now is have kids that read at a higher level across the board. So, yeah, I think the importance of the leader is to keep the conversation focused and block the noise as much as you can. And there is a push and a pull at the end. I'll tell you our final adoption. While I say again, the curriculum selection was not alone the most important piece of this. it was probably the most contentious
Mhm.
piece of this, and we had to push through and just know that the vocal people aren't always the majority. Sometimes they are. In our case, I don't think they were. But you have to be okay with some discomfort and trust the data, trust the results people are getting across the country, and then be willing to look outside of our country.
Mm,
So, or not just, I said country, not our country, our state in our case. Look outside of your state for examples of people with similar demographic areas that are outperforming you.
yeah. Thank you so much. And Troy, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, also kind of on the role that you're seeing superintendents play in your county, principals, lead teachers, as well as the county office, but how you see all these roles really leading the change.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. And if it's okay, I'll build off a couple of things Don and Kristen said. Um, Part of it for me individually was because I came from, like Don, the high school route, and I knew I was never going to be the expert, but I had to gain some more knowledge. So I went to every training I could, 95% group, age of learning, you name it, core. I was going to everybody's training, just trying to so I could speak the language around science of reading. But I think that vision, I love how Kristen said that, the vision piece, everywhere I go, we have a strategic plan, but there's two things that I focus on pretty much everywhere I go, and one is literacy and one is outdoor learning. And so if it's, I was at a school board's dinner last night, I talked about early literacy. If I'm at a Rotary, literacy. If I'm with politicians, I talk about literacy because that's the vision. We can change this county's economics. We can change the job market. We can change everything that we want to aspire to in this county by working on the literacy rates. And so trying to help all see that vision, the more we talk about it. So that's one of my roles is making sure it's front and center in everything we do. Literacy, literacy, literacy. When we have our leadership retreat, there's a piece on that. Everywhere we go, we talk about literacy and how important it is that kids can read and write, and not just kids. We have an adult program, and probably some of them graduate and maybe can't read and write very well. We've got to help them too, whether it's high school, adult, K-3, whatever it is, we have to build that. And so that's one of our roles as a county office. We have really great district superintendents, and they've all bought into this. Um, and they are leading the work. You know, Stockton Unified Superintendent, she's doing a lot to really honed down. She brought in letters training for her staff right away and made it a mandatory training pretty quickly. And for them, that is working. I know for some, it may be core, it may be AIM or something, but the idea of helping teachers get what they need. You know, we ask the question, can kids read and write? If they can't, why not? What are we going to do about it? And then from there, what do they need to ensure they can do it? And so I think we have seen through this community of practice that our district superintendents are buying into that. So we're seeing more reading coordinators, we're seeing more TOSAs, we're seeing more coaches, more training. And we know that's just a start. And we know there's a long way to go. But as everybody's starting to think and breathe this all the time, that really starts to take hold. We know it's important that our site administrators are also trained so they know how to support their teachers. So that's going on in some of the districts. Um, but if everybody can see the vision, and it's not just about kids reading and the scores going up, but it's about changing our community and setting these kids up for success. And we all are building to it's who can argue with that vision anymore. Um, and I love how Don focused on some of that data piece and talked about what it's really like addressing that data and those kinds of things. And I also like the discussion about policy and everybody looking at policy. So I think our role is to continue to support that, we're actually going to meet with the assistant soups from the districts.
Mm.
Say, what can we continue to do? The community of practice is one thing. What we're driving in our own programs, like we have a charter school and we've asked them to be the exemplar. So what do you need? But we also want to know what our districts need from us. And if they say the barrier is subs, or they say the barrier is we can't find a TOSA, or this or that, because this is our number one initiative, I'm willing to put money in and send a coach to a district or things like that. So we want to know what they need to remove the barriers for this.
Thank you so much. So a lot of our audience that we have today are, teachers in classroom schools, literacy coaches, and just kind of what advice do you have for leaders around like how do how do you really bring some folks along? What are some things you've seen in your schools that you're like, wow, that is just gold, and if we could replicate that, what are some things that you're seeing your
Yeah,
leaders
sure.
do? So, Don, I'll start with you.
Yeah, first thing is some of my answers are coming from a superintendent seat, but let's start with leadership is in every seat.
Hmm.
And when you can find those people that carry weight with their colleagues, that's so important. And the idea that some people, if you have a multiple subjects credential and you're teaching in California, you may or may not have ever been taught really how to teach reading. So the idea that if you're learning and you're uncomfortable about some of the things that are coming across your table now, to acknowledge that you might be in that confusion stage where, and actually there's a whole change uh, model that uses the word incompetent, and it doesn't mean that you're incompetent, you don't know how to teach. It means when in a time of change, you may have a feeling of incompetence. No one wants to feel like that. So you need to bring everyone along on the journey the best you can about, hey, if this is uncomfortable or a total departure, you're really not sure that you're doing this correctly, it's okay. And the idea of teacher coaches, I can look at a spreadsheet all day long. That's going to have zero impact on the classroom teacher when having a good coach to come in and watch and help and teach model lessons is going to be infinitely more important than any statement of importance or metric that a school district superintendent or school board comes up with. So I just think it's really important to stay in the lanes that you're in. You don't want me coaching teachers on reading instruction, um, but I can help make sure that we clear the resources and the time to allow that to occur. So I think it's just really important to know who's got what role in it, and just a narrowing of focus and goals. Again, I came to Palo Alto 8 years ago. We had 120 goals. You may as well have zero. If you have 120, you don't have goals. We have five. And early literacy, and now it's literacy, as we've expanded to just literacy in general, is one of our five and has been for the last 4 or 5 years. The other thing, your goals can't change every year. Good goals, the bucket should remain pretty stable, and then the evolution of what happens underneath can have some shifting. One of our first goals when on the back end of COVID, when we received money, people use that money for a lot of different things. We trained all of our primary teachers in OG training, which is a methodology, not a curriculum, but it got them thinking
Hmm.
about this thing. So consistency, focus, discipline. Discipline is required to maintain a sustained effort in a particular goal. So if you're looking for, hey, we put this thing in place, did we blow the roof off of it? Yeah, you may or you may not. And in our case, I will say we did, and then we had a little regression, which is also super common. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean that second year was a failure any more than the first year was a victory party. It's a sustained effort.
It's a very good point. Thank you. Kristen, it'd be great to hear from you and, kind of the perspective, Mississippi kind of 10 years later, really kind of how teachers were brought along. Has that led to more teacher retention, more teacher satisfaction? What are some things that you all saw on the ground?
Yeah, so we started our efforts with the teacher training. And I think, looking back, we did some training with leaders, but we started with teachers. And so because in our minds they had the direct line to students. So we started with teachers. And so we did some leadership training, and then we had to kind of, when I moved into the position, we did a lot more with leaders because what we were seeing was teachers were saying, "You're impact. We know what to do, but we are not the decision makers." And because we're not the decision makers, it's hard for us to go in and, make those decisions that we know are right for kids. So we really try to be intentional about leaders. Some things that we did were we created a literacy leadership network of leaders. Those leaders that were former coaches, those leaders in districts that were federal programs director, early childhood directors, that building principals, superintendent, just a cadre of leaders that were moving the work where they were. And so when we got them together in a room, it became really powerful because they did these role-alikes, these job-alike things where they were visiting each other's districts and creating momentum in certain place because they were in very similar roles. So we had to go back and kind of be creative of how we really pushed leaders. And I would have to say this, it was almost like in some places there was this uprising of teachers. Like teachers were like, look, superintendents and district leaders, whether you're the expert or not, these things need to happen. And I remember Dr. Wright saying, and she would say to us often, sometimes because of the sense of urgency of this work, we don't have an appetite for pilots. Like we don't have a time to just pilot something. If we know that these things are going to work, superintendent, if you would just get out of my way and let me help you do this or lean on me as the expert and I pull you along with me because I started this work as a coach. So there was my building level principal didn't necessarily know all the things and we were learning together. But she didn't get in my way, but she held the teachers accountable. And sometimes for leaders, for us trying to push this work and lead from where we are, we just need you to help with the accountability piece and we'll pull you along and you learn as you go. One thing that I do like to talk about, and we talk about a lot with this work, is sometimes what we leave out is the idea of managing complex change, and that comes out the medical field. But what happens is we have these visions, we have vision, skill, incentive, resources, and action plan leads to change. And we want this type of change. We want this to see student outcomes change. But what happens is we'll have the vision, we'll have the incentive, we'll have the resource and the action plan, but then we don't have people skilled enough to do the work, which causes anxiety. Or if we have the vision, the skills, the incentive, the resources, and we don't have a plan, then we have a false start. So really, as we're looking into this, making sure this change that we're talking about in literacy is very complex and you have to have all of the pieces together. And I think Dawn said it earlier. Sometimes as teachers, you have to lead from where you are. You have to take that step and not be afraid to say, hey, principal, I know you have this idea, but this idea is not working. And it's not working well for kids. And it may say that we're an A district, but only 20% of our kids are proficient. So are we teaching reading or are we teaching kids to read? And there's a big difference. In a lot of schools, we're just teaching reading and we're not teaching kids to read. So we have to really look at this in totality. I would have to say, and my suggestion would be leave from where you are because, you know, I'm a disruptor. When it comes to this, I have a son with dyslexia, and I know this importance and what the same things that I want for him, I want for every child in my state and every child to have those things. So, we have to take those things into account.
Thank you so much. And Troy, what are you seeing, in your county? How are you seeing your, district leaders really work closely with teachers to help to bring them along?
Yeah, thank you. I'll share an example, but first, I agree with both Don and Kristen. I love when teachers lead from where they are, and it's amazing. As a site principal years ago, loved when teachers would come in and say, "Hey, can we try this? Can we do this?" And there's so much more power if my teachers are leading this literacy work than me because I can't get into the weeds as much, but I can sure provide the resources, what they need, and help with the vision. So I love those comments about the teachers leading. That's amazing. And I love having so many teachers on the call today. I had the opportunity to go visit Lodi Unified. So I'll use that as an example. I've been out to several of our districts, and I'm really trying to focus on, hey, if I'm coming out, can I see what you're doing in literacy?
Mm.
I've been able to do that in several districts, and I was in Lodi Unified, which is one of our northern districts here in San Joaquin County, about a month ago, and saw what they were doing specifically in literacy with curriculum and looking at assessments and things like that. But then we also had the opportunity to go into a study session where there were two coaches and two teachers, and they were looking at the data together and discussing the data and the real-time data. We know there's a lag in some of the state data. So they were looking at what data could help them see what they are doing is working. And so they were going through this data and they were so proud to show it, and I loved it. And partway through, I said, okay, is it working? Is it improving? And their eyes lit up. And now they took another 20 minutes with me and were able to show me specifically how it is improving what's going on within their school. And they were so proud of that. And we have that going on in so many places. And again, we got to keep building and the systems and things like that. But to see that in one of the school sites was just a real lift for the day, to be able to see teachers talking with coaches, understanding why the data is important, and being able to show what that data actually means, and then where are we going to go from there, and what are we going to do next. It was a very powerful experience for me. And then my role, I think, with that is to help highlight that,
Mhm.
because I will hear from community members some of the negatives about education. And so my role is to make sure they understand, no, we got awesome stuff going on in education, including around literacy. And so I'm able to take these stories and share them in the sectors where I go oftentimes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Another topic I know that we all talked about when we were prepping for this is succession planning. So all of you have been tremendous leaders. You've, built coalitions, you've brought people along, but as you look 10 years out, how is this work going to sustain? So what are things that you're actively doing right now in your role and with others to ensure that, the great work that has been going on doesn't stall, doesn't go in another direction, that we kind of keep moving forward. So, Kristen, I'll start with you with Mississippi. What are things you've all been thinking about or thought about?
The great thing about that is that as we were creating the plan, the work is still continuing. So because and I think I started off by saying this is not work that's fast. It takes time when you think about implementation science and something where it takes 3 to 5 years and you're prepping, you're exploring and prepping the system and all of those things, and you get to that sustainability and that EPIS model. Then what has happened over time, you've built this momentum in relationships and trajectory that you're not going in. Like I said, our strategy in Mississippi is still the strategy.
Mhm.
It's still a focus on prevention and intervention. It's now that in the teacher educator training, we've improved there. In coaching, we improved there. In really looking at the assessments and kindergarten readiness, we improved there. So the model and the work is still sustaining. that we just go deeper in our knowledge and level of understanding so that when we look at the data, what is our state assessment data saying? What is our screener data saying? How are we triangulating data to see where those gaps are? And for us, now that we've made gains in the K-4 space, we're seeing what's happening with our middle and upper grade teachers. Are they coming out not prepared? Is there, do we take that model and scale it for middle school and scale that for high school? So you build this momentum in this work, and when you build the momentum and you include or and very inclusive of all people, from superintendents, from leaders, from other higher ed, you include them. When you have this inclusiveness of folks, then the work tends to sustain, and you're just going again deeper and going into other spaces based on your data.
Thank you. And Dawn, how are you thinking about it? That, if another superintendent comes in, and how do you keep all these efforts going?
Mhm. Another superintendent coming in. Do you know something I don't know?
No, just, if by chance you ever decide.
I'm just joking. Uh, yeah, I think long ago I developed a mindset that systems beat heroes.
Mm,
And sometimes heroes can get things started. I think about it like this. Sorry for anyone who loves school gardens, but school gardens are almost always started by heroes,
mm.
and they look beautiful until that hero's gone, and then you've just got a weed patch and a broken box. And I'm always slow to add school gardens, and people think I hate gardens. It's like, no, I don't like things you can't sustain. So I think if you're looking at something, you're having success because you have an absolute champion, that's might be okay in the very, very beginning, but it can't be champion dependent.
Mm-hmm.
So, keeping it front and center, even after champions or perceived champions move on, is really important. Routine is important. Here, we strive to be boring and basic more often than people might think. We have quarterly reports on data. We do a beginning of year, middle of year, end of year report, along with a summative report on data. We do updates routinely about our student by student work that our principals and teachers do with each student, especially those who are underperforming in some ways. I think making it routine and basic and boring is way more important than splashy, hero-driven,
Mm-hmm.
bright lights.
Couldn't agree more. And Troy, I'm going to let you kind of have the last word on this question.
Thank you. And gosh, what a treat to be with Kristen and Dawn. It's hard to listen, take notes, and be ready for your next thought all in one, but I've taken a lot of notes from the two of them today. Um, I think creating the culture, right? I'm going to speak county office, which hopefully is all of our districts as well. We're trying to create a culture of literacy. So can that sustain? And that's one hope. But I also agree with all these systems comments. So thinking about what do we need to do within our system, not only to make sure literacy for our student programs, county office programs, but also what in our system will continue to inspire district leadership as they change to be on this same path. That one thing we're about to do, because we're 2 years in, the declaration of support that we did 2 years ago, we're going to refresh the letter. We've got about 4 new district superintendents since then. So we're going to refresh the letter, ask all of them to sign on again so that we keep bringing that. And even though they're involved in the community of practice, why not share that declaration and then refresh it and have the new soups be just as excited as we are with that. And then internally, we're building some things as well. So I am upping my literacy department. I just adding more positions and trying to make it so that they are not a team of two, but can be a team of much larger, where a system can be built that will continue to support. One of the assistant superintendents is tasked with, you are all things literacy, and please stay with literacy. And so if this person moves into another role, that next assistant superintendent would also be tasked with all things literacy and continuing. And then trying to make sure within that systems change that both Dawn and Kristen talked about, our schools that we are trying to make exemplars, our own programs, ensure now, while we have this culture of literacy, that those systems changes are happening now. So that if we do leave, it's not like, okay, what was that? And there's no system to make it continue, but to keep it going. So I think that culture of literacy, and then building underneath that with all the systems that support that, are pretty amazing. I actually want to go visit Dawn.